Chapter 1, Section 1, The Purpose of Government. Hello and welcome. Today we will be discussing what government is. Government is made up of formal institutions, and it's the process through which decisions are made for the people. Most governments consist of three main components: the people, the powers, and the policies. People that make up government are both elected and servants of the state. These include people such as judges, magistrates, constables. They could also be teachers. When we talk about servants of the state, we take servants through the civil service exam. Now, the civil service exam was created to avoid nepotism and corruption within political systems. The basis here is that you take a test. The same test is used for any job, let's say the FBI. So I take the test for the FBI, you take the test for the FBI. Whoever has the better score is then hired next. That's how the civil service exam works. When we discuss elected people, these are people that we decide are best for us. And it could be through their qualities, it could be through their names, it could be through just whoever they are that we know, and that makes them the best candidate. So therefore, we'll elect them, and we do that, of course, through the ballots. Now, power is the government's authority and ability to get things done. And there are three basic types of power. The first is the legislative power, and that was created under Article 1 of the Constitution. The job of the legislative power is to make the laws. The second type is the executive power. The executive power was created under the second article of the Constitution. The main function of the executive power is to carry out the laws. Now, under legislative, that would be our Congress. Under the executive, that would be your president. If it's in the state level, then legislative would be your Congress, and the executive would be your governor. And the third type of power is the judicial power, and this was created through Article 3 of the Constitution. And the main job of the judicial power is to enforce the laws, and if we're talking about the Supreme Court of the United States, their main job is to interpret the Constitution or interpret the laws. Once they make an interpretation, then the states must all follow that interpretation. Now, here's where it's a little interesting. When we're talking about judicial power, if the Supreme Court says something and its ruling is sort of vague, to say the least, then states have to adapt to that, but they can choose how they adapt. So the Supreme Court doesn't tell every state what they have to do, they just give them the guidelines to do it. And three is policy. Under policy, this is where decisions are made in pursuit of a goal. These goals can include our laws, our programs, our taxation, and or our defense. Now, you've heard of policy before. Apply it in school. We have a dress code policy. People got together and they decided that this is what needs to be done. So this could be through our principals, our assistant principals, it could be through our superintendent or our assistant superintendent. And once they agree on a policy, then they sign off on it, and it becomes something in our student handbook that you kids must follow. And that's a policy. Characteristics of a state. My first question is, what is a state? And at this point, I would have random answers in the classroom. A state is a political border. A state is something that is run by a government organization, such as a president or a governor. A state has rules. A state has people who follow those rules. So that's a state. That's what a state looks like. Now let's take a look at the four characteristics of a state. The next question regarding a state is, how did states come into being? And there are four thought processes on this. The first is the divine right theory, and that's where states are founded by God or the gods, and that the ruler possesses a divine right to rule. And you'll see that in a monarchy. Number two is evolution theory, and that states that that states are gradually formed over time, and it grows from a family, and then extended kinship, and it just keeps growing and growing and growing. And the third origin is the social contract theory, and that is basically when states form when their people reach a contract to surrender some power to the common authority in return for security. And that would, of course, be the Mayflower Compact. And then the last one is the force theory, and that's when states form when an individual or group uses force to make enough people to submit to their central authority. And of course, you can choose any dictator you want to out there. It would probably the one closest to the United States would have been Fidel Castro in 1959, whenever we helped him overthrow Batista in Cuba. And then, of course, he turned around and shunned the United States after we helped him. And of course, he just passed away not too many years ago. But that's an example of force theory. The first characteristic of a state is its population. Now, in the United States, as of the 2010 census, we had a population of 330 million people. In the state of Pennsylvania, we have a population of 12.8 million people, which ranks us sixth largest state of the 50 states. So the population is important because it, of course, drives the income of the state or territory in which the people belong. Number two is territory. A territory has clearly defined and recognizable boundaries. Here you can see we have the United States, a map of the United States. Inside of that map, in maroon, is the state of Pennsylvania. We are in the northeastern section of the United States. The United States also has five other territories. Those territories, if you haven't learned about them before, are American Samoa, Guam, the Northern Mariana Islands, Puerto Rico, and the U.S. Virgin Islands. These territories all play a contributing role to what a state is. Number three is government. And government is an organized body that is recognized from within its own boundaries by the people that live there and follow the rules laid out. Now, in the United States, we like to call ourselves a republic or a democratic republic. We are a democracy, one in which the people make the rules, one in which the people vote their own people into the power to make those rules. We, of course, then follow. And there are other types of governments that we'll learn about in the next couple chapters, or next couple sections, excuse me, and those include communism, those includes oligarchies, monarchies, etc. The fourth characteristic of a state is called sovereignty. And in a sovereignty, the supreme power or authority is found in some form of written plan. And in our case, it was originally under the Articles of Confederation, then it would have been under the Constitution. If we're talking about the very first sovereignty issue, then you're talking about the Mayflower Compact, in which everyone agreed to do certain tasks in order to come off of the Mayflower. Now, when we talk about popular sovereignty, that's the people's will to give up their rights in order to have people rule them. And so we will learn about that more as this course goes on. But those are the four characteristics of a state: population, territory, government, and its sovereignty. Now, the five functions of government include national security, to maintain order, to resolve conflicts, to provide services, and provide for the public good. So let's take a look at national security. And when we talk about our national security, we spend in the United States nearly $1 trillion a year just in defense alone. Now, I do want you to know these. I'm not sure they'll be on the test, but I do want you to know these. Our military is comprised of the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, the Marines, the National Guard, and the Coast Guard. And those six are the first defense of our country. Now, so you understand, national security also involves diplomacy. and that's peace. In the United States, we spend between 35 and 40 billion dollars just on keeping peace around the world. And that could be giving countries money so that they're friendly to us because money talks. So again, when you think of national security, and I talk to you about the military, it's not always going down and beating doors down. We do other things to make sure that our lands and our people are safe. Our second function of government is to maintain order. Thomas Hobbes was quoted of saying, "Life without government is like a war pitting each individual against one another. You need government for stability." So, as we look at this, think about the rules that are set in place. Think about the rules that you have in the classroom, that you have at home, that you have in our state, that you have in our country. And each of those rules has a purpose, and it's to maintain order. Chaos, if you've ever been in chaos, is not fun. It causes extreme anxiety. And our laws in our country can differ from state to state. An example is in Pennsylvania, you're legally able to drive at 16, but in Iowa, you're legally able to drive at 14. So again, you have to know the laws. And that, of course, maintains the order of each of the states. Now, right or wrong, if a politician were to take money, then we consider that, or bribe, we consider that illegal, and the politician would go to jail. But there's no law against a politician receiving campaign contributions or gifts from the people. So as long as those contributions come into play, those are perfectly legal. But if you try to outright bribe him or her, that's illegal. So how do we know the laws? In this class, we'll talk about the Constitution, and of course, we'll talk about many of the laws that affect you kids. But when did you learn murder was illegal? Did anyone tell you that? Did you read it? Or is it just understood? How do you know it's wrong to go through a stop sign? Think about just the different laws that you've learned up until this point in your life. How did you learn those laws? Did you see them on TV? Did you read about them? Did a teacher tell you? Did a parent tell you? So, again, as we move through this course, I want you to always focus on what the beginning was and how we got to the present. The third function of government is to resolve conflict. And a lot of our conflict, because of the laws that I told you about, are resolved through the judicial branch, through the court systems. So the basic level of court would be the magistrate court. That would be the magisterial. Now, if you kids happen to go to juvenile court, then you're in front of a judge, but we call that judge a master. And the next level, of course, then would be city or state. And from there, it would go to national. And our national court would be the Supreme Court. And as I said before, the Supreme Court of the United States, their job is to interpret the law through the Constitution. And they have set precedent. So past cases are called precedent. When all these courts decide on cases and they're universally accepted, that's what's known as precedent. So the Supreme Court will follow that precedent. Now, the other thing that they'll follow is something called compromise. Now, a compromise is a give and a take between two groups. Could be a person, could be two states, it could be two countries. And when we talk about compromise, compromise is very important in that it will define how America grows from 1781 all the way till present day. Our fourth function of government is to provide services. The United States provides services through the mail system, through schooling. Um, you are entitled to go to school um, in our state from the age of 5 until you're 21. And once you turn 21, of course, then you have to exit the school. You don't have to start school in Pennsylvania until you're 8 years old, but that doesn't give you any room to fail. And how do we pay for these things? We pay for these things through taxes. And we rely on people's money to the government to pay for these things. And it includes things such as roads, our clean water, public parks. These are all things that everyone is entitled to, even though everyone may not pay the same amount, everyone is entitled to them. There also can be, through services, some restrictions. If you don't qualify for certain things, then you aren't entitled to those, such as free housing or free meals and possibly certain welfares. And our last function of government is to provide for the public good. So when we're providing for the public good, the first thing we need to identify is, what does public mean? There's a difference between public and private. And what is good? Is good just enough? So let's take a look at providing for the public good. Before 1900, there was really no laws to govern how our food was made and distributed in the United States. And it wasn't until Teddy Roosevelt, our 26th president, came along, and through reading The Jungle, he changed the way, I mean, he virtually single-handedly changed the way Americans got their food, and we also now know what's in our food. Before that, it was a hit or miss. Um, the person before Teddy to try this out was H.J. Heinz, with his invention of red tomato ketchup. Um, there were other types of ketchups out there. There was mushroom ketchups and so on, but those weren't governed. And the reason Heinz was so successful was because he put his tomato ketchup in a clear bottle so people could see exactly what they were getting. And of course, that took off. Well, Teddy did the same thing. If you talk about especially out in Chicago, the meat packing industry, and when they were grinding meats up and so on, if a rat fell in there, well, that rat stayed in there, and you just got ground up, so you may get hair. They'd also spit their tobacco juice inside the vats, or even add sawdust to our food. So it sounds disgusting, but it wasn't until Teddy Roosevelt changed our lives for that. And so when we talk about the public good, um, it's helping everybody. So again, is there a difference between public and private? Yes, there is. Should we help everybody? Of course we should, because you never know when you will need that help. Our last section of Chapter 1, Section 1 deals with theories of rules. The first thing we're going to talk about is legitimacy. Now, think of this. What is legitimacy? What is legitimate? The answer to this lies in the fact that you come to school, you take out your cell phone, and I, as the teacher, acting through the rules of Mount Pleasant Area School District, say to you, put your phone away. Well, I have a legitimate right to tell you that. Now, let's just say I see you out in public. Maybe you're at McDonald's, and I see you with your cell phone out, and I say, put your cell phone away. Well, do I have any right in public to do that? And the answer is no. So the first theory of rule would be legitimacy. The second is divine right. And in divine right, it's a belief that the ruler was chosen through God. And in this mindset, rulers, kings, and queens of past would tell their subjects that they received their power directly through God, or they had God's blood in them. And of course, to disagree with the king or queen meant you were also disagreeing with God. And of course, that set people off in a fervor. And they didn't want to anger God. So they took what they were told and lived with it. The third one is natural law. And a natural law is a system of rules that are derived from the natural world. It's also our natural rights. And when the United States was founded, we used natural rights as our system when creating the Constitution. Now, under the social contract theory, the first governments were formed as a result of people agreeing to submit to the authority of the state. In return, the state would provide protection and support. Thomas Hobbes wrote Leviathan in 1651, and he stated that people lived in a state of nature and enjoyed complete personal freedom, but were driven by self interest and were constantly at war with one another. Because the state of nature is so violent, humans agreed to cooperate. Now, that meant governments must have great power for people to obey it. John Locke, on the other hand, believed people had natural rights, which included life, liberty, and property. And of course, you today say life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Well, the government had to protect those rights for the people to be happy. Government power should be limited or restricted. People could consent to change the government when they saw it fit. And the last person is Jean Jacques Rousseau. And Jean Jacques Rousseau, under the social contract, introduced a third version of the state of nature and the social contract. And he said when people lived in nature, life was good. When they formed governments and communities, corruption began. So that should tell you the mindset of the people in the 1600s, 1700s, and how we formed what we did today.